is a little difficult here in the West. And there are several opinions of it, even among Eastern peoples. We have here perhaps one of the most complicated of the yogic practices. And it has always been my problem, wherever possible, to see how certain transitions could be made between Eastern and Western thinking for the improvement of the Westerner. This is especially difficult with Hatha yoga, because it involves a series of factors which may give considerable concern even to Eastern thinkers in the matter of their application. Theoretically, basically, Hatha yoga is a step in the development of the entire yogic theory. But in practice, it often becomes an end in itself. And to the degree that it does this, I think it is detrimental both to the Easterner and the Westerner. In other words, it rotates upon a concept in which certain ethical overtones are not given perhaps their adequate importance. We mistrust profoundly any system which attempts to mechanize the spiritual growth of man, or to place it under the keeping of arbitrary factors of any nature. Yet at the same time, there is in the discipline and theory of Hatha yoga a number of points that are useful to us. So we have to broaden the foundation a little and seek for that which we can use. And perhaps the first thing that comes to mind as important to us is the emphasis upon the relation between the person and the body. We have so long grown up in the concept that person and body are identical, that the house and the man who lives in it should be regarded as a package, as one entity. But we have lost sight of the fact that the person is more important than the body, that the person uses the body but is not the body, and for the most part, that the partnership between the person and the body is inadequate. The average individual either ignores body or becomes its servant. Either the body is comparatively unimportant to us and we live from day to day neglecting it utterly, sacrificing it to any ambition that we may have, or else we become body hypnotized and become gradually under the control of this instrument, so that actually the gratification of the body in its various departments becomes the principal purpose for living. Both of these extremes are wrong, and both of these dangers are pointed out in Hatha yoga. Yet the solution in the Eastern school is not as happy as we would like. Therefore, let us try to understand a moment the relationship between the person and the body, or the human being and his world, for both of these have certain parallels. During the medieval period of European history, the world suffered from what was known as the Black Death, or the Walking Death, the bubonic plague. The bubonic plague was the result of man's complete and profound ignorance concerning sanitation. He did not realize that this difficulty was caused by rats carrying very dangerous bacteria. He did not realize that there was any relation at all between his own lack of understanding, cleanliness, sanitation, hygiene, and this curse that descended upon him. He could only assume that this plague was sent by God to punish him for his mortal sins. It did not occur to him that he was being punished for his mental ignorance. Now, as this plague devastated the larger part of Europe, resulting probably in from 30 to 50 million deaths in 100 years, we can reduce this pattern slightly and bring it to bear directly upon ourselves. The average person, inadequately informed as to what constitutes the proper care of his own body, neglecting it, ignoring it, failing it on levels of hygiene and sanitation as an individual, opens himself to the corruptions of a body which has not been adequately and properly maintained. And the terrible point involved becomes that this body, sickened with toxin, without adequate thought as to its needs, gradually corrodes and corrupts not only the flesh, but the emotions and the mental nature which must function through this body. So the concept that the body has something to do with salvation cannot be overlooked. That the individual can ignore all the laws of material nature and rush to grasp the laws of spiritual nature is a false concept. Man must grow. And Hatha Yoga invites man to recognize that growth must be through effort. That the individual who wants to grow must do certain things. And that one of the things he must do is to learn to use and not abuse the body which he has received. The body which becomes either dharmic or karmic according to his uses and misuses of its natural resources. Now that the body should be maintained in a reasonable manner is pretty obvious. So in the West we have developed calisthenics. We have created the gymnasium. We have suggested setting up exercises and setting down exercises. We are now concerned largely with food intake, to devitalize this and deadulterate that. We are profoundly and deeply moved and worried over smog because it pollutes the air, but we constantly overlook the fact that 99 persons out of 100 do not know how to breathe. So smog or no smog, a great many individuals die of suffocation. So the effect of the sound mind in the sound body is more or less the underlying concept behind the principles of Hatha Yoga. But these principles have gone afield, and now you cover almost anything from what we might term calisthenics and gymnastics in the West, all the way to psychic phenomena, spiritualism, and numerous other mysterious arts and sciences. But to come to our essential problem, in the West, we are concerned with finding a way to liberate man from his body. I don't mean necessarily to separate the one from the other. We can do that by making a flight and stay crossing the street. But the problem of the individual achieving a freedom within his body, a freedom from body, while still he inhabits it. The Greeks were well aware of the fact that the only freedom man can enjoy in a universe ruled by law is an harmonious adjustment with that law. As long as the individual does not break a law, he does not know that it exists. He lives happily ever after until he breaks the law, or thinks he does. For immediately that he goes contrary to law, the law moves and breaks him. So that, to a degree, Hatha Yoga, with its various physical and psychical implications, is an important part of religious philosophy. It is important to man's spiritual salvation that he knows how to walk, how to sit, what to eat, when to eat it, how to breathe. These things are important to him spiritually as well as physically. Now in the West, when we develop an athletic attitude, we become obsessed by it. We begin to strengthen the body, we begin to take such good care of it, that practically every resource that we have mentally and emotionally goes to taking care of the body. This does not produce this emancipation we desire. The individual simply becomes body obsessed. He begins to have his picture taken with his muscles flexed and considers that he has now become a model example of something. Now, the ideal is that the body shall become the pedestal upon which the person stands. It shall advance his cause. It shall be useful to him. And he is to have a constructive relationship with it at all times. Hatha Yoga, then, offers the problem of thoughtfulness concerning the need of the body. It causes the individual gradually to reach a point in which he instinctively, subconsciously, almost unconsciously, preserves bodily equilibrium. Now, we well realize that in India this is not the primary purpose. But there we have another problem that goes very closely into the athletic attitude of the West. We have a sort of psychic athletics over there, which cause certain phenomenal processes, certain experimentations, and peculiar and particular psychic chemistries produced by the disciplines of Hatha Yoga to become supreme, which they really are not. There is our difficulty there. But with this thinking, we go to the next problem. In any subject which we wish to attain proficiency, what is required? First, aptitude. Second, discipline. Some individuals are so constituted that advancement beyond a certain point in any art or science will be extremely difficult. Others do not attain simply because they do not give the necessary continuous attention to the thing they are doing. And the problem of handling the body is one of disciplining the mind and the emotions and preserving the equilibrium of the body against the tyranny of these over parts. The body can be destroyed by the mind and emotions just as easily as it can clog them. The harmonious relationship of these elements is something greatly to be desired. Now, when we approach discipline, therefore, on a philosophic level, we are not working basically with inhibitions. We're not working with frustrations. We're working always with the channeling of things to their proper and normal uses. The normal body becomes a good and useful instrument for the attainment of other things. As such, it must be and should be maintained by the person who wishes to go further in philosophical discipline. And because the body is bothersome to the average person, because its requirements are inconvenient to him, because it would rest when he would not rest, because it requires a certain patience which he finds difficult in developing, the body presents a magnificent problem of discipline. Now, we have the same kind of thing, at least quite a parallel case, in the blessings bestowed by the small child in the family. Children can be a tremendous cause of irritation, exhaustion, despair, fear, doubt, worry, fatigue, everything you can think of. And yet, the family as a unit is one of the world's greatest instruments of discipline. It gives the individual an opportunity to grow under challenge and to administer the unknown effectively and efficiently. The body gives the same general situation. The body is the first thing with which man can work to prove that he intends to make a science out of his own living. If he cannot conquer the body, he will not conquer the universe. If he cannot bring it into some kind of a moderate, reasonable, normal pattern, he can scarcely expect that his ideas and attitudes are going to change the course of human history. The difficulty, of course, is that there is nothing less glamorous to work with than ourselves. The great glamour is when we honestly feel that we're about to change the course of other persons' lives. That's glamorous. Changing the course of our own is not glamorous. And perhaps the discipline is all the better because maybe no one but ourselves will ever recognize it. Although in time others are probably going to notice it also. So when among people devoted to advanced thinking in general, we find 99 who wish to convey to others noble ideas, to one who wishes to convey them to himself and do something about them. So here is discipline. The discipline of the individual beginning with himself, and proving conclusively that he has put his own house in order before he goes out trying to change the course of other persons' lives and living. Now, what is this thoughtfulness? Why should we be thoughtful? Well, most of our troubles come from thoughtlessness. Most of our great misfortunes in life are the result of acting before we think, or before we have given mature contemplation into the thing we are doing. We have allowed our appetites, our emotions, our thinking, our feelings to escape us. Later we bite our tongue and wish we hadn't spoken, but it's too late. We have. Perhaps we can undo the damage, perhaps we cannot. Certainly we were not self-disciplined. The body can be, and therefore should be, the symbol of our distinct and determined resolution to integrate our own resources. Now, there are many ways in which these things can be done. In India, various techniques and methods involve the individual proving, through practices in which he indulges, that he is able to do things which would normally be uncomfortable, unpleasant, and perhaps impossible, simply by the complete resolution of his own consciousness that these things shall be done. He gradually learns, for example, to remove pain from various parts of his body. He is able to withdraw nerve sensation. He is able to go unusual periods of time without food. He is able at will to control many practices and habits that with most of us are involuntary. He can change the pace of his heart at will. He has gradually exercised a certain power over the functions of his own body. And he has learned how this is done through a certain disciplining of breathing, through attention focused by concentration upon various parts of the body, and by carrying energy upon breath to various elements or sections or structures of his own nature. Thus he is able consciously to control nutrition, consciously to control digestion, consciously to regulate internal functions normally autonomic. By these means he indicates little by little that he is able to govern and rule this body, that it will do as he requires, and that at all times he is master of it. Now, the attainment of this end is not primarily useful because merely the body is controlled. It is because of the power to control is attained by the individual. It means that he has gradually learned not only to turn these various forces upon his body, but to control the sources of these forces within himself and through his own thought and his own contemplative power, to control the functions of his nervous system and the various functions and structures of his body. All of this is an excellent testing ground, an excellent way of demonstrating the intensification of conscious resources and how the individual will attain the control of them. Unfortunately, in too many instances, however, this becomes the end, and the person who can produce a certain kind of physical, psychological, or psychical phenomena is regarded as an adept at Hatha Yoga. Actually, when this occurs, it is a blind alley. It is not going to achieve the ends which we wish to achieve, namely the gradual growth of the person to his own spiritual estate. The very discipline becomes a stumbling block. And here we have Hatha Yoga occupying a position that corresponds to science in the West. It is the most scientific of the yogas, and is not too different in its implications from our modern scientific attitude in general. By science, we gain the exact knowledge of doing certain things. By science in the West, we can produce miracles. miracles that would probably astonish many an Eastern yogi if he saw them. But the ends are not mature. The reasons for these phenomenal occurrences are not worthy of the energies we are using. And the achievement of the incredible becomes a fascination, becomes an end in itself. So that if we split the atom, we really think we have achieved something. All of this emphasis upon technique can leave us very cold, weak, and helpless, unless we have something else, something deeper, something wiser, something greater and more noble, moving within the structure of consciousness as we understand it day by day. But let us think for a moment in terms of a few simple concepts of how this idea of discipline can be useful to us. Discipline requires for its real function this continuing remembrance of the law. In other words, it means that gradually the rules of life and the rules of living become subconscious in us. When this occurs, we instinctively obey them. And it is this instinctual obedience, this gradual dying out of even the impulse to disobey, that brings the person ultimately into an harmonious adjustment with the plan which controls him and directs his activities. The West is without this instinctive adjustment. When we try to be good in the West, we really make a project out of it. We make a project so terrific that not only do we annoy ourselves out of face, but we become a miserable element in the entire social pattern. The process of trying to be good is the West's most disagreeable vocation. It is completely exhausting to all concerned. And we do not end by being good. We end either by being frustrated or utterly rough. We get a kind of psychic condition of being muscle-bound. Or perhaps we approach it in a different way and simply become so fearful that what we call virtue is nothing but fear of the disaster resulting from vice. Our attitudes are wrong, basically, in all of these particulars. The process of being good, of unfolding naturally, like life around us, of accepting and using energy as it is intended to be used. All these requirements involve a gradual recognition of a gracious relationship with faith. It is not a battle. It is not that we are forever fighting our lower natures, God forbid. It is that the individual is moving triumphantly toward a larger realization of values. He is not overcoming his vices one by one. He is not fighting them out to the bitter end. He is growing. And by the natural processes of growth, he outgrows the old and grows into the new without conflict. Why then, in the West, is 90% of progress accompanied by conflict? The reason is that the individual lacks the Eastern concept of how to grow. And I think Hatha Yoga can give us something that is useful in explaining to us how to grow. We make a project in the West of a particular. If we decide that we're going to grow in the West, we put all our attention on the process of growing. Growth becomes a fetish. If we decide that we are going to be wise in the West, we study, we research, we examine, we attend school, we do everything possible and make this wisdom problem an obsessing, completely absorbing progress or prospect of some nature. If we think we're going to be spiritual, or think there's any hope of it, submerge ourselves in this desperate effort to be spiritual. We neglect our friends. We look down our noses at the individuals who do profane and ordinary things. We have no longer time for friendship. We have no longer time for that little gathering somewhere or for relaxation. We've just got to be good, and we've got to work at it every minute. We're not good at the end of that time. We're just nervous wrecks. Our relatives. We also have great trouble converting other persons to our beliefs because it is so obvious that these beliefs are gradually destroying us. Why should anyone else want them? In the contemplative approach, as we understand it in the Eastern way of life, the individual does not go after these things in this aggressive, militant, dominant, Western mode. He realizes that growth and the development of wisdom, the development of understanding, the release of spiritual resource through the individual, all of these things are perfectly natural. The problem is not to try to make it happen. The difficulty has been that we've spent thousands of years building Western civilization to make sure it couldn't happen. The whole thing has been that we have built resistance to one another under the delusion or illusion that that is the way we will get it. So we come back again to this problem that we mentioned before, these simple words in the Bible, which probably give us more clue to internal growth than anything else in Western religious writing, and that is the simple statement, be still and know. Now, Hatha Yoga has to do with the body being still. It has to do with the gradual relaxation of tension and the removal of all obstructions within the body to the free circulation of life. Wherever we have disease in the human body, we have obstruction. Wherever we have obstruction, we have conflict. And when life in its natural and free motion in space is prevented from achieving its motion by some circumstance or condition unnatural or unreasonable, then we begin to have tension. We have pressure. We have the gradual rise of negative elements and factors. In the body, we know this through elimination. We know that if the individual fails in his eliminational processes, that the whole body and finally the psychic economy will be injured. And that many an example of what appears to be bad thinking or emotional upset is simply due to lack of proper elimination. So in these things, our problem is to relax pressures and to increase the normal, natural distribution of resources. Or if this has been disturbed already, then the therapeutic phase of Hatha Yoga comes in. And there are many elements in this particular discipline that would be of the greatest use to the Western physician. Because one of its valuable parts is its ability to create something we need, desperately require in the West, and that is a method of therapy which the individual can use upon himself. In other words, through Hatha Yoga, the intelligent mystic can become his own physician, taking care of nearly all of even those more obscure ailments for which the West as yet has most inadequate methods of treatment. So there are many phases to this. But let us begin now in thinking it out for the average Western person. Very few Westerners reach middle life without some bodily difficulty. Whether they realize it or not, it is present. This bodily difficulty is going to gradually intensify and increase, shortening the period of the service of human life. The human being requires approximately 21 years to reach maturity. By every reasonable analogy in nature, his length of life should be at least 150 years. During most of that time, he should be efficient. He should be able to handle within himself most of the causes by which bodily injuries and infirmities sap his vitality and destroy his efficiency. Yet, as a matter of fact, from the day he is born to the day he dies, he is continuously building up difficulty for himself. He is building up the physical difficulty, emotional excess, and through the misuse and abuse of body, he is destroying his mental and emotional functions and faculties. So in order that he may have the maximum experience, that he may live for the enlightenment of his inner life, he should and must begin at first gently, and perhaps later a little more scientifically and assiduously, the disciplining and organization of his bodily resources. So for a Westerner, a very simple problem in Hatha Yoga could be the division and arrangement of his time. So we have a time allotment. A day, we'll say 24 hours a day in which to do various things. It is said that the Prophet Muhammad, the great Muslim leader, divided his day into 3 parts. One part of which was to rest and repose, one for the service of his people, and the third for the improvement of himself, or the worship of his God. Now, in the division of the day into 3 parts, the individual is doing something that not 1 in 100 of us is able to accomplish. He is beginning to integrate or organize resources. So I would say that for the simple Westerner who is not yet ready to breathe in one nostril and out the other, or something of that nature, the beginning of Hatha Yoga can be the putting in order of this problem of the day. To what degree do we viciously sacrifice balance in the process of satisfying ambitions, feelings, impulses, urges, appetites? How many individuals are able to control their own periods of work and rest? Now, some will say that they cannot because of the type of employment that they have. This is, for the most part, however, an excuse. There are rare examples where the individual must reorganize his plans because of the circumstances of his economic survival. But even here, these changes must be organized, not permitted simply to happen. But assuming that the individual has some kind of a balanced life, reasonably balanced, that he works a certain amount of time, rests a certain amount of time, does he do these things in a manner suitable to maintain his own greatest efficiency? Is he doing it thoughtfully, purposefully, intentionally? Or is he simply drifting upon the surface of habits? Is he simply doing what everyone else does for no good reason? Now, the average American lacks balance in the distribution of his time. Some bring their work home and worry about it all night. Others bring home to the office and worry about that all day. The average person who becomes a little thoughtful forgets how to play. The individual who becomes really player forgets how to work. And the individual who works and plays and does all these things forgets how to live. And if he does his other activities with sufficient intensity, forgets how to sleep. To bring these things into patterns, so that the various parts of the personality have their reasonable opportunities, that the individual has a way of controlling his own activity, controlling his own thoughts, controlling his own appetites, doing those things which he knows to be reasonable and right, and when the time comes, refraining from doing those things which are unreasonable. Now, this takes thoughtfulness. The individual must give a little time and attention to the organization and integration of his own life. 99 out of 100 persons interested in advanced thinking do not know how to relax. They are so intent upon their spiritual growth that they are perfectly willing to sacrifice the sleep they need, the work they should be doing, to the simple process, what they believe the indispensable process of becoming good. But at the sacrifice of work and rest, nobody can become good. That's the important thing. Something goes to pieces instead. And the individual trying very desperately to be good ends up by being very neurotic and very irritable. So here is discipline imposed upon conduct. Begin quietly. Arrange your day. Arrange your rest and your work. Arrange your time so that the various phases of your nature are brought into activity in a balanced manner. If you are engaged in the daytime in some highly intellectual pursuit, your avocational time should be much more along artistic and cultural lines. If you are spending most of your day in some art, then you will lead to strong intellectual avocational interests. You should balance. Working distinctly and definitely to see that the whole nature is properly taken care of. At the same time, a fair amount of thought and care in connection with nutrition. Proper consideration for rest and repose. Enough control so that you do not allow yourself to become fatty and do things to your body which are not good for it, simply because of fashions, because of the requirements of style and that type of thing. To gradually recover from these meaningless and purposeless compromises with society around you. Not to an extreme, but to a reasonable degree, so that you are not injuring yourself in order to please people who are not worth pleasing. Little by little, you will find that the organization of life, the balance of it, relaxation when it is proper, work when it is proper, rest when it is needed, proper nutrition when it is obviously required. When these things all work together instead of working against each other, what happens? You do not have the feeling that you are a perfectly organized creature, a well-running machine. No, you do not. You suddenly have the feeling that you, as a human being, no longer need to be concerned about yourself. Gradually, through this kind of integration, you lose self-awareness, because there is nothing hurting, nothing aching, nothing to constantly make you mentally or emotionally or physically conscious. You no longer have to say to yourself, oh, there goes my old temper again. Or you do not have to say, I just wish I could stop worrying. You gradually become unaware of the working of your own structure as soon as this structure is operating correctly. Thus your mind and your emotions and your energies are relieved from the problem of being constantly self-aware. Now, self-awareness is the opposite end of that which should be attained by yoga. Self-awareness, regardless of the cause, is the constant focusing of attention upon the person. It makes no difference, really, whether you go around saying I all the time, which is an obvious form of egoism, or whether without having said the word or anything, you are body conscious, mind conscious, and emotion conscious constantly. I know people that never talk about anything except themselves, and yet at the same time, they are not really consciously egotists. They are not saying, I'm good, I'm great. But they are saying, I'm sick, I'm miserable, oh, if I hadn't done that, oh, if I'd only done something else. The I still becomes the focal point. I'm so sorry. I'm so tired. I'm so worried. I'm so frightened. And whether it is in an aggressive form of egotism or not, it's always I. Everything is focused upon the I. If you have the misfortune to hit your thumb with a hammer, it's very difficult to keep your mind off your thumb for a few moments. The pain draws your attention there. It is also very difficult to keep your thinking away from your own worries if you worry all the time. You cannot detach from them. Your energies become more and more turned in upon this little egocentric problem. And so, you are I-conscious all the time. Not because you're so proud of yourself, perhaps you're ashamed of yourself, but you're still on your own mind all the time. And Hatha Yoga will tell you that, all in all, functions never are as adequate when the mind is on them as when the mind is on something else. If your mind could, by extension of consciousness, be set upon only reality, every function of your emotion, thoughts, and body would be normal. Because there would then be complete detachment. This attachment means there would be complete freedom from the offense of our own pressure upon ourselves. We would no longer be constantly pushing ourselves around, which is the favorite activity of the average person. Whether we are flattering ourselves or blaming ourselves. Whether we are saying how good we are or striving desperately to act humble, which is a hard job for most of us, we are still thinking of nothing but this. It's all going into this internal package. Now another group of persons believe they can solve it by going around all the time saying, I am perfection. I am infinite abundance. But it's still I, all the time. Whether we're rich or poor, success or failure, everything is this little package set in I. You very seldom get a good recovery from sickness or anything of that nature, while the individual just sits around and thinks about himself. Very common form of nervous breakdown involves a certain amount of cardiac difficulty, where the heart becomes a little irregular, or we have tachycardia, or drop beat, or something of that nature. When this happens, the individual becomes what we commonly call a pulse taker. He's always wondering whether his heart's still beating or not. So he is completely unaware of the fact that if it wasn't going, he wouldn't be able to grab hold of it. And every time he misses, he wonders whether it'll ever beat again. And that is an excessive form of this same problem. We become hypercritical, hyper-watchful. Always expecting we're going to make a mistake, we do. Always wondering, worrying, thinking, everything locked in ourselves. Now, naturally and normally, such a situation is bound to produce tremendous bodily difficulties. And the answer to a large part of this is the gradual understanding of what is necessary in order to relax. So we come to another important phase of Hatha Yoga on the physical side, and that is the power to relax. Now, how do we relax? There have been books written on it. Most people are nervous wrecks by the time they finish the book. There are all kinds of rules and suggestions and recommendations about relaxing. Relaxation, however, does not actually begin with the body. Relaxation begins with the mind. Relaxation is a problem of the mind letting go of false tension. And the individual most likely to be able to live in a relaxed condition is one who has an internal growth sufficient to bring about a balance, or at least some degree of harmony between the impulses and instincts of fear and faith. The person who is fearful can never relax. The individual whose faith is strong enough will seldom if ever be tense. Thus, faith, which is the internal, immediate apperception of a good, whether it is known or understood or not, brings with it relaxation. Relaxation comes then from a general condition of consciousness that is transferred to the body. And the individual who has integration within himself will be relaxed physically. So we hear people talk about integration and reveal tension. Therefore, the integration is not real, but the tension is. Unless the internal life produces an effect consistent with itself, then that internal is not correctly understood or correctly applied. It must produce the needed results. Relaxation in man begins with the cultivation of his own internal values. The individual must be bigger than his problem, or he will be in a state of tension. When he is larger than his problem, the problem dissolves, and the tension dissolves. This is one of the reasons why the development of an internal life is so vital to the individual. Without it, he can never escape the plagues which burden the external life. For disease actually originates within man, and is a dis-ease of his own consciousness. And where this consciousness is uncomfortable, it will manifest as physical infirmity on some level or other. Now, in carrying on still further with this thinking, we come to another important consideration. What's the sage man? What is the physical source of the human being's efficiency? And we must answer that the physical source of this efficiency is an eternal and ever-available life essence. This life essence, universally diffused in all things that live, may be likened to a river. In the Chinese philosophy, it's likened to the Yangtze, the great mother of rivers. And along the shores of this river, on all sides down the banks, are the little villages. And out on the river are the little boats, the fishermen who gather their food from the river, the farmer who plants along the side of the river and uses it for irrigation, the villages that need the water. Everything depends upon the river for survival. In man and in the universe, there is an ever-flowing river in space, the river of energy, the river of life force. And all things exist and develop and survive because of the availability of this life force. Man exists because he has within his own consciousness certain distributing centers, by means of which this life force is gathered and then distributed through his body, through his Yangtze River, which is, of course, his great arterial venous system. The blood carries life. The nerves carry life. The breath carries life. And just as life is born also in the rays of the sun, everything depends upon one life for its survival. As a great city must be sustained by a vast water supply, and sometimes it is necessary to go, as in the case of Los Angeles, we are contemplating even going to the Columbia River and bring water all that way. And we've already gone to the Colorado River for water. We have to have water for this enormous city. Man lives by life, a water of life. And his entire activity, whether it is physical, vital, emotional, or mental, all depend upon this universal life principle. This principle, in its normal and natural function, is available to man. It is available to him at all times. It is always present in him, or he could not live. But man is a very intricate structure. And in very few human beings is the distribution of this life principle complete and adequate. In each human being, it is incomplete for some reason or other. It is incomplete because man is incomplete. He, first of all, could not distribute the entire energy field. He is not attuned to it. But those parts that he is attuned to, in their distribution through him, are variously conditioned. And this conditioning is due to the possibility and the factuality that the human being, by psychosomatic tensions, is able to constantly influence the distribution of energy through himself. He can, by a single thought, block energy. He can, by another thought, release energy. He can deprive certain areas of his nature of energy by what we might term archetypal thinking, archetypal emotions. Every feeling that we have as an emotional being and every thought that we have as a mental being have, in some way, physical polarities in our structure. These physical polarities, reacting to psychic stress, open and close doors in our physical, vital circulation. As a result of that, our habits, our patterns, our attitudes, our policies are all, to a degree, resulting in an imbalanced distribution of energy. Every time we are angry, we create within ourselves a situation as unpleasant as the fission of an atomic bomb. A temper-fitted man is as dangerous as an atomic bomb in the world. All the pressures that we have, the ability of emotions and thoughts, all of these affect the distribution of the life agent through the human body. Every attitude we have also sets up habit patterns in structure. And while it is a little difficult to understand, perhaps immediately, all the implications of this subject, one of the things that we finally learn is that most of the distribution of man's energy field results from a condition arising in what might be termed the upper abdominal cavity. There are nerves and nerve centers in the abdominal area which control almost completely the distribution of this universal energy field upon which man is so dependent. These energy fields tie in directly with his psychic life as a person. And we know that there isn't a single mood that the human being can possibly hold that does not either increase or decrease, and in one way or another unbalance his vital magnetic field. Thus, the person is constantly revealing his character by means of the imbalancing of the distribution of vitality. To do this over a period of time and to create powerful habit patterns that become autonomic or automatically repetitional means gradually to set up involuntary patterns which remain, which continue to grow and continue to build until finally they can create almost a scar in the vital structure of the body. And from that time on, energy no longer distributes adequately through that area or through that part of the body. For example, grief. If held as an emotional intensity by the individual, decreases the available energy field of the heart. We say people can die of a broken heart. They can. Not because the heart breaks, but because of a sympathy between an attitude and a distribution of energy. And the chronic ailments that we suffer from physically are nearly all the gradual symbolism set up by chronic attitudes, which deflect the distribution of energy. So, basically, energy becomes the principal cause of health or sickness. For whenever it is normal, the individual is normal. But when it is depleted or obstructed, then any one of 100 different situations may be set up due to the failure of the protective structural mechanisms. So that there is one kind of health, but there are hundreds of kinds of sickness. And wherever there is a natural tendency or a debility, or the devitalized person is exposed to contagion or infection, he is more likely to be affected. So the preservation of energy, the keeping open of all the natural channels of energy, and if they have been blocked in some way, their reopening and the reorganization of their resources. These are important elements in Hatha Yoga. And how does the average Westerner work with this to try to achieve a certain amount? On the symbolic level, he is trying to do it with vitamins. And the vitamin theory comes very, very close, symbolically, to his big problem. But what he doesn't realize is that no matter how many vitamins he takes in, the greatest source of vitamins is always within himself. He is using these vitamins because he does not know how to release his own vitality. He doesn't know how to get at it. Or because he believes that these special forms of nutrition will support the failure of vitality within his structure. Now, vitality never fails. This is an illusion of man. Vitality cannot fail because it is universal. What fails is the rapport between vitality and the individual. He cuts himself off from vitality. And he does so by damaging the instruments through which the distribution of vitality takes place. When he has damaged the instruments, it is like throwing his radio set out of tune. He will no longer receive the program, but that does not mean that the broadcasting station has stopped. The broadcasting station never stops. But the individual can tune his own vehicle in or out of that program. The moment he becomes tense, he tunes out. The moment he relaxes, he begins to tune in again. So tension blocks the flow of essential energy. Now in the West, we make a virtue out of aggressive attitudes that are essentially tense. We say the individual isn't really trying unless he's practically muscle-bound to the effort. Unless he's half-sick, he's not doing a day's work. Unless he has practically come to a nervous breakdown, he's not faithful to his employment. We reward people because of the tremendous activity they are passing through, rather than because of any accomplishment. I remember a man who used to employ men. He said he didn't want to see any man sitting around in his office. Well, he says, what do you want them to do? His partner said to him. He said, I don't care what they do, but they've got to keep at it. More or less the attitude that we have. We believe that we will be suspected of being alive because we are active. It seems to be the only proof that we have. Actually, we are defeating life by this tremendous aggressiveness. Because the whole yogic program is finally to bring the individual into at one-ment with the universal reality. And as surely as the higher yogas teach man to be still and know the universal in the mind or in the emotions, so Hatha Yoga says the universal must be experienced in the body. The eternal, the great Lord of all, must not only be released to the mind and to the emotions, but the human body must become the body of this Lord. The human being must give not only his inner life, but also his outer life. And of course, in the West, we try to get rid of the outer life, throw it away, sacrifice it, humiliate it, pass through various processes by which we become ascetics in the sense of frustrating the outer life, in order that the inner life may have its full place in our experience. But it is much wiser to assume that as we wish the eternal to be revealed through our inward parts, so likewise it must be revealed through the outward form. For just as the body of the universe is the body of a blessed God, so the body of man becomes the body of his own consciousness. And when it has been brought into such order that it releases and expresses and reveals this inner consciousness, then the body is no longer a problem to us. It is an instrument. It is a useful and proper servant of our great purpose. And it is just as important that consciousness be revealed through body as through thought or deed. And it is revealed through body in the terms of the absolute harmony and integration of body. The body becomes ensouled by a universal power. And that in this way it becomes capable of being immediately available to the will, to the consciousness, to the mind and emotions for the fulfillment of their own numerous activities. Now there is this inner consciousness, then the body is no longer a problem to us. It is an instrument. It is a useful and proper servant of our great purpose. And it is just as important that consciousness be revealed through body as through thought or deed. and it is revealed through body in the terms of the absolute harmony and integration of body. The body becomes ensouled by a universal power. And that in this way it becomes capable of being immediately available to the will, to the consciousness, to the mind and emotions for the fulfillment of their own numerous activities. Now there is another question that arises in this matter, and that is the sublimation of body. In the great processes of evolution, as taught in Eastern thinking, there are two schools. One is that man is going to gradually escape from body. The body is going to be tossed aside like an old garment along the road somewhere. Perhaps this is one of the reasons for a peculiar symbolism that we find in the teachings of Buddha. Because when the time came for the young prince to go forth and take up the work as a mendicant, he is said, at least in one legend, to have taken off his princely raiment and his jewels, and to have cut his hair, and the little angels carried the hair away in space, and all these kinds of things. And then he looked for an appropriate garment with which to cover his body, which would later become the symbol of his order. Found that it was peculiarly suitable to his need, a shroud that had been cast aside beside the grave of the dead. This shroud became the symbol of the brotherhood of the yellow robe, the saffron-colored garment of the Buddhist monk. There's a symbolism here, perhaps, namely, that the body itself has a kind of holiness in it that we have been more or less taught to disregard. We have been taught to kind of look upon the body as a burden unto the spirit and let it rest that way. Actually, there is much to suggest that the use of the body by the consciousness in it is gradually accomplishing the transformation of the body itself. And that the time will almost certainly come when the invisible psychic vehicles of man will absorb the body. That instead of casting it off and forgetting it, evolution will probably ultimately result in the body gradually rising in its vibratory rate until it is returned again into consciousness. That it will not be cast off, but that it will be reabsorbed into the higher energies of man. And that the fact that man lives in the body is the way in which he is contributing to the growth of the millions of forms of life that make up the body. Because our bodies are composed of countless living organisms, hundreds of millions, billions of organisms that are eternal living things within us. To these creatures, which may or may not have experienced of the circumstance, this self in us, this egoism, this conscious polarization within ourselves is a kind of deity upon which all these cells depend for their lives, and upon the wisdom of which the whole economy of the body with its vast population depends. Thus man as the God must ultimately accept in himself the consciousness of his own parts, just as man must experience ultimately with others of his kind the consciousness of his own causing power, or that which is the creative power behind him. So as man hopes to be united with the universal, it is very well probable that the separate cells in man have as their destiny to be reunited with that universal which is their superior, in this case the consciousness of man himself. We mustn't regard the body as an evil, something to be borne as a burden, something that is a symbol of our sin and fall. But rather we should regard it as our universe, and that in the administration of it we are beginning, in a simple way, the experience of our own godhood. For just as we live and move and have our being within a universal consciousness, so these little lives have their life and move and have their being within us. And in some way, our consciousness is diffused to become theirs. And the restoration of their consciousness into unity is the restoration of our own. Thus, in the process of integration of consciousness, man draws all these innumerable little life units gradually back to form the over unit of himself. They return to him as we hope to return to God. And through this experience, we are fulfilling a responsibility to body. For body is our world. Body is our universe in which we are experimenting with the tremendous creative powers of nature. We are not aware of this as yet, but there is much to cause us to assume that it could very well be the truth. And that therefore, we are here to redeem body, not to destroy it. We are here to bring about its resurrection within us to these spiritual ends and purposes for which it was intended and originally fashioned. Now, Hatha Yoga gives us something else to think about, because not only do we have the body to consider, but we have the effect of body upon mind and emotion. Man has recognized the need for thoughtfulness. We all need it. We practice too little of it. And as a result of thoughtlessness, we get into innumerable complicated situations that deplete and depress all of the resources which could normally be available to us. Thus, we block our own energy supply by circumstances which we have permitted to occur, which should never have occurred, and would never have occurred had we been thoughtful. Now, the average person has got to learn to be thoughtful. He's had too much experience in being thoughtless. He has too many bad habits to break down. So he can become thoughtful in various ways by the disciplines which he imposes upon his own life, symbolically, visibly. Have you ever thought, for example, what it would mean to sit down and keep quiet for 5 minutes? Everyone says, oh yes, I can do that easily enough. But try it. You'll be lucky if you last 5 seconds. You will find that the moment you relax, the moment a dynamic objective no longer presses you away from yourself, and you begin to fall back into yourself, that you're in trouble. You will find that in the moment the controlling purpose is not there to help, innumerable small secondary purposes begin to objectify. A friend of mine who tried very hard to concentrate over a number of years and never was able to get anything out of it except a headache, told me on one occasion that the moment he tried to sit quiet and concentrate, something itched. Something does itch. And sometimes it's one of those psychic itches that is so deep you can't even scratch it. But this problem is that the moment we relax our control, there's a tendency of everything to go to pieces. Nothing seems to be able to run of itself. And the moment we try to release our consciousness for any subtler and deeper purpose, something itches. There is no cooperation, no basic cooperation. And unless the body is brought under discipline, symbolically at least, the individual cannot depend upon it remaining quiet when he wants it to. And if the body does not remain to a certain degree quiet under certain conditions, there is practically no possibility of an over-life for that person. He can never get far enough from the storm and the fury to achieve anything as an internal being. The body is forever nagging him, forever disrupting him, forever reminding him of itself. So he has to learn to struggle with that situation and overcome it. And one of the problems in yoga is to achieve internal freedom from body, in the sense that the individual can sit down quietly and have an inner life when and where he wants it, as he needs it, as he demands it, without this endless interruption on one level or another. If the body doesn't interrupt, the emotions are very apt to. And if the emotions will not, then the thoughts will. But the individual seeking to establish a situation of receptivity within himself is always bothered by himself. There is something that never lets go, something that never permits him simply to make the adventure of identification with reality. The illusions are always working. They never rest. It's like the sound of a great city. There is never any silence. And in this compound of man, there is never any silence unless this silence is the result of a scientific solution to the problem of the sound. It will never happen by accident. The individual will never wake up some morning and find that he can do these things unless he has tried and labored and learned and disciplined. Now, the purpose of yoga, basic purpose of yoga, is a reversal of the object-subject relationships which we know in life. In the West, man is to possess truth. He is going to conquer it. In the East, he is going to be possessed by it. In the West, he is going to know. In the East, he is going to be known. The consciousness of the Western man is attempting to solve the mystery of reality. Whereas in the East, it would be better to say that reality is seeking in some way to reaffirm that it already knows the mystery of man. It is that the universal will return to its own universality, and in so doing, that the individual receives into and passes through himself a tremendous universal quotient. He is not going to achieve a personal illumination. He is going to experience a universal illumination that is forever present. There is an Indian story which I rather like the thought of, namely that Buddha, sitting under the tree, received the illumination. And we would say, and as the story says, the heavens opened and the arhats and the Buddhas who had gone before and all the great hierarchs appeared and descended and surrounded him. But in some of the schools, such as the Zen Shu, there's a little different approach to this. They say that the illumination which we associate with the enlightenment of the Buddha, that the illumination was always there, just like it was the day it came to him. And what we call illumination is man's experiencing that which is always there. It didn't happen in the sense that it occurred at that moment. It is forever occurring. But that was the moment in which the man tuned into it. So that universality, absolute consciousness, is forever present. It is not something that man is creating. It is not something that man is building. It's not something that is a chemical byproduct of his own thinking and emotions. Truth, reality, actuality, being, this tremendous overtone concept is always here. It is here right now. It has always been here. It was here before any creature experienced it. And it will be here after the last creature does experience it. The moments of enlightenment that come to individuals are the eternal in its relation to the individual, not to itself. It is always. So this terrific crash of the cosmos is taking place eternally. But the individual, under certain experiences, becomes susceptible to it, becomes capable of at least a momentary experience of it through himself. But when it fades out, it doesn't mean it's faded out in the sky like a dying star. It means that the adjustment between that which is unchangeable and man has been broken. So that as far as man is concerned, it seems to fade out, but the thing itself never fades, never increases, never decreases. It is the relationship of the person and his ability to carry the experience that determines the duration of it. So the individual, as a person, is a comparative unit of ignorance floating in a sea of wisdom. individual is a little spot of darkness in an ocean of light, or a little spot of self-light in an ocean of universal darkness. He is the little drop that is seeking to return to the sea. And in this tremendous concept, the reason why this experience always seems so distant, so remote, so unattainable, so inconceivable, is that man cannot get into the condition of his own inner whereby he can experience it. Sometimes he gets quite close and he has an intuitive perception of something. He feels something happening, and then the spell is broken and he's back where he was before. Or in a great mysticism or in ecstasy or in samadhi, he may have a momentary flash of something. He may touch the radiant fringe of this dark robe of the unknown. And he cannot hold it. And he drops back again into his own objectivity. And constantly, he is seeking for this restatement, this one-ment with a universal principle. The yogas have as their primary objective to gradually remove the obstacles to this universal. Actually, growth is not the increase of virtues, but the removal of obstacles. It is not that something is growing better because good is forever, but that interferences are being gradually removed. So that growth is not really the positive thing it seems to be. It is the recovery from negatives. It is the elimination of that which is not so. Man, when he says, I'm searching for truth, what he is really telling us is that he is trying to recover from error. He's trying to get rid of the mistake. He's trying to get the straight line again, as against the crooked path on which he has found himself. To do this, the East Indian, has a concept of evolution that is rather different from ours, and has been a cause of considerable discussion and anxiety among various schools of thinkers. Evolution in the West means the gradual growth of things. Growth in the East means the gradual restatement of the reality of things. Actually, evolution has reality because either things must grow gradually through the release from error, through experience, which is the basis of growth. The individual, age after age, restating, reaffirming his own mistakes, suffering from them, comes finally to giving them up one by one. And as he does so, he is said to grow because he's getting over his own mistakes. Now, this is evolution. Now, it can take a very long time, or it can take a shorter time, depending upon the integrity and the energy that is directed toward this particular end. Now, as the Taoists in China will tell you, that the supreme action of the will is that action which annihilates the will. That the supreme end of all of these processes of growing is that which transcends growth itself, with the recognition that the ultimate is already here and has always been here. Therefore, that growth is bridging an interval from error to reality. And that this can be bridged either by fighting toward reality or by the sudden and dynamic relaxation of error. A terrific relaxation of error. And this is the process of being still, the dropping away of the entire concept of error. This, of course, sounds like a quick way to do it, but don't get too excited. Because what it takes to get the consciousness into the condition that it will let go of error is not a simple matter. But theoretically, the individual could achieve the samadhi or the nirvana, or even the paranirvana, instantly, theoretically. Factually, he's not going to make it. Because he cannot blast this personality atom of his own consciousness. But actually, he can achieve a transcendence over the evolutionary process by the tremendous achievement of that which is the natural end of evolution, the breaking up of the error pattern, the breaking up of the fixation of the mind, by means of which things have appearances but not reality. Nothing is either good nor bad, but thinking makes it so, is an old Eastern axiom. So if thinking makes things good and bad, to stop thinking means that they are no longer good or bad. And in that, they are real. Because both good and bad are dreams. But the suspension of the power to formulate the concepts of good and bad results from discipline, results from the gradual direction of consciousness. Now, the Western psychologist is of the opinion that this Eastern method is to drop the individual back into a negation. That what the Easterner is trying to tell us, according to the Western psychologist, is that the individual should renounce everything that he has achieved from the beginning of time. That the individual is to admit, frankly, that his own existence is a mistake. And that his entire civilization, his world, his culture, all of these things are delusions. And that the only solution to himself is the complete removal of himself. That is a Western conclusion drawn by a broad stroke by an individual who didn't know anything about it. Because that is not actually what is implied or intended. It may seem to be so, but it is not actually so. The thing that lies underneath this project is that man is faced with a dilemma. He's going to have to face it sometime. And that dilemma is that the fragment can never, of itself, possess totality. The individual, like a fish in an ocean, will never be able to drink the whole ocean. And yet, the individual's desire to know, the impulse to know, is endless, beyond any conscious control by himself. The desire to grow is innate in man. The desire to find reality, as Lua demands, is the beginning of time. But he has worked upon the basis of contemplation, namely that he can sit somewhere or stand somewhere and look out and see reality. That he's going to be able to sit down and listen while someone tells him the truth. Or that he's going to be able to look out and see the truth and say, well, now that's the truth and that isn't. He is always assuming that as a separate contemplating entity, that he is going to be the spectator to the revelation of universal reality. It's going to happen and he's going to see it happen. And from that time on, he's going to know what it is. So when Pilate asked Jesus the question, what is truth, the Master was silent. He didn't answer. And theoretically, he was the only one that could have. But he didn't. Because the concept that man is going to possess it, that he's going to be able to go walk down the street and say to a friend of his, last night I saw the truth, is an optimism. It can't happen. The reason why it can't happen is that the human being simply hasn't the faculties to know it if he saw it. And if every resource available to the part was developed, still, totality is not an integral possibility of a part. The individual unit cannot experience totality. The only thing that can experience totality is itself. The only thing that can ever know truth is truth. The only being that can ever experience universality is universal being, because it is the only totality, it is the only fullness of itself, in which there can be no deficiency of itself. Now the question naturally arises. Can fragmentary consciousness, existing only in the contemplation of power, even contemplate or formulate a concept concerning the totality of an experience at any time. If totality is experiencing itself, have we any way of even guessing what that experience may be? We cannot, for the simple reason that the complete experience of totality is its own uniqueness. Nothing but itself can. And totality implies something else. It implies no division. Therefore, no contrast and no conflict. We know things and estimate them only because of contrast or conflict. This is large because this is smaller. This is a peaceful state because last week that state was war, and this is the opposite. This we understand because something else we do not understand, and everything is light and shadow. In totality, there is no light and shadow. There is no contrast and no conflict. Therefore, how can we define an experience which is without boundary, without dimension, without contrast? The Westerner, trying to work with it, comes to the conclusion that it sounds to him like a great big hole in the dark. The only possible experience that universality can have of itself is a universal experience which to the Western thinker would be equivalent to no experience, complete suspension of experience. That would be true if it had to be estimated in terms of any experience that we know. And we go back to our psychological problem. We have this term, the unconscious. But are we to understand that as something in itself unconscious or something of which we are unconscious? Actually, we have only the assumption that we have bestowed the name unconscious upon that which transcends our concept of consciousness. Yet we have no way of knowing that the unconscious is unconscious of itself. We are unconscious of it. Now, totality as an experience of consciousness for man is therefore impossible of attainment. Man can approach it a little more directly under some conditions. But as he approaches it, as he gets even a step nearer to it, he discovers that the definitions of fragments as he has known them, these definitions lose their distinction. So we have the individual who says, if I had universal consciousness, I could play the piano. No, he couldn't. Because in universal consciousness, the piano wouldn't exist. It belongs to a part of something. It belongs to a division, but not to totality. Totality cannot bestow wisdom of itself, because wisdom is a fragment again, and wisdom cannot possess totality. So as we approach the absolute boundary of universality of consciousness, we move towards something to which we can never take a positive relationship. I remember one dear old fellow I knew years ago who had a lot of trouble with the absolute. Finally, she joined a group that was really the answer. That group was the absolute. That was twice as good as the absolute. Then one day she explained to me that the only reason she still existed was because she had gone into the absolute and come out through the top. It still remains a great question of how foolish we can get. But we cannot contemplate that, because the very thing we contemplate with is part of it. And the contemplation of it still means two things. Someone contemplating and something to contemplate. So there has to be two. Or there can be no relationship exist. But therefore, as we approach this issue, we have to be the contemplating power. And we have to contemplate what is over there. In so doing, we still are completely in a sphere of fantasy, because the only thing that we will find over there is what we are here. And instead of finding the reality, we will see only the reflection of our own little circle of consciousness in space. The contemplator can see nothing but himself. Therefore, to him, the universe is someone contemplating back at him. And he doesn't know that it's himself. Therefore, he can begin a very delicate process. By drawing up on fantasy and imagination, he can begin to create things out there. And his imagination and his fantasy will populate that space out there with the most intricate tapestry of deities and powers. The more he thinks about it, the more he looks at them, the clearer they'll get. But they'll all be himself. He invented them, he devised them, he put them there. And he will continue to put something over here that is in here, as long as he is related to this and that by an interval. He cannot experience. He can only create there. So whatever he creates within his own consciousness as his concept of reality will be reality. But the fact he will never know. He will always be seeing only the products of the illusional focus of his own individual contemplative nature. So he cannot get there. The self cannot get there, and it never will. The only thing he can do is to gradually pass from the consideration of lesser things to the consideration of greater things. He can pass from the hypnosis of materiality to the hypnosis of theology. On the material plane, he was serving false gods. He could do the same thing on the theological. But as long as he is a contemplating unit, examining and estimating something separate from himself, whether he see that separateness inside or outside of his own body is not important. As long as he conceives it as something that can be contemplated, the interval remains. And he cannot cross that interval because he cannot challenge or assail or attack that infinite that is there. What then is the only possibility that he can achieve? He has to move from a contemplative footing to what may be termed a meditational footing. He has to move from an effort to know to the condition of a capacity to receive. Totality can reach him, but he cannot reach it. Totality has always been within his grasp, but he didn't know it. He can receive it, but he cannot demand it. He cannot visualize it, he cannot explore it, but it can visualize him and explore him. So that in your Eastern concept, the bridge across this interval is to pass from the state of the observer to the state of the participator. In other words, instead of seeing, instead of attempting to analyze with the best Western technique, the ability to become receptive to it, to let it move in upon you, is the important thing. Now, it cannot move in upon you if your house is already full. It cannot move in upon your selfhood and annihilate. Because the universal power, presuming it could do so, has no right to do so. That power cannot destroy you. It cannot even destroy an illusion for you, because it's the cause of all the illusions you've ever had anyway. It will not destroy this central force. It can move through you and past you, and you will never know it is there. The center of focus becomes, in a strange way, the great sacrifice. It is the eternal martyr, the scapegoat, that which must die for the sin of the world. It is the voluntary renunciation of the contemplating selfhood that makes possible the universal experience. That has to occur by the individual voluntarily, moving from the condition of an observer to the condition of one experiencing a receptivity into his own nature. Thus, as the self, or the center of contemplation, relaxes, to the same degree the universal seems to move in upon the individual. And as his own definition of what it is ceases, the experience of that which it is becomes possible. As long as man says reality is square, it will always seem so to him, and he will never know what reality is. If he says it is round, he will never know what it is. If he names it, he will never find it, as Van Dyck says, but the one who finds it needs no name. Thus, whatever his own consciousness says of it, that definition blocks the reality. No matter how noble, how beautiful, how generous, how kind, how laudable this definition may be, it still blocks the fact. Man can say God is all, and by that he has blocked the fact. He may say God is good, but by that he has blocked the fact. Because the moment he imposes anything from himself upon that, the thatness of it is gone forever, as far as he is concerned. Consequently, in the problem, the individual is forced to face the fact that he cannot get across that interval. The only thing that he can do about it is to reduce gradually his own definition, realizing that to the degree that he can escape from what he thinks this is, to that degree he may find out what it is. All his speculations are limitations. His only hope is that this thing will experience him, and that gradually he will be capable of an identification with a state that is completely beyond personal experience. Now, what will happen to him if he finds it? Assuming for a moment that he achieves this state, what happens? If this state is achieved under discipline, temporarily, as in a samadhi or something of that nature, it is not complete. Because if it was complete, and the dissolution of the ego had taken place, there would be no return from samadhi. So, even samadhi is not a full statement of this reality. But it is this statement being brought nearer and nearer to the individual through the gradual reduction of his own interpretive power. Then passes from contemplation to meditation by transforming interpretation into experience. In other words, and this is not easy to say, in case you may think we're having a little word trouble. We are. Because these things do not fit into words at all well. They fit into silence much better. But in an effort to try to convey something, we try to use words. In your state of samadhi or ecstasy, or in an apatheistic condition, there has been a gradual breaking down of an interpretative instinct and a gradual increase in the impact of a reality until fragments of the reality and fragments of the interpretation mix. The interpreting becomes less, the realities become stronger, and the individual therefore moves from a condition of interpretation to an almost completely uninterpreted impact. He may have the ecstasis of a tremendous feeling, an incredible feeling of godliness, an incredible feeling of an absolute benevolence moving in upon him. In the moment of ecstasy, he doesn't interpret it. And as long as he can refrain from interpreting it, he can hold it. But the moment he says to himself, this is wonderful, the spell is broken. The moment he contemplates the thing that is happening to him, the contemplator emerges again, closes the door. It is only while the impact of this thing has swept him completely out of his own rational and emotional footings, so he accepts without question, like the small child accepting knowledge. In that moment, he receives a certain degree. The contemplator is overwhelmed for an instant, for a little time. And then the orientation begins again. The contemplator says, I think I was illumined. The moment he says that, he is no longer. Because the contemplator has reestablished its individual self again and closed the door. So these illuminations come in the form of a tremendous sweeping surge that cause tremendous emotional or psycho-mental reflexes and are usually described as this tremendous and inconceivable experience of well-being. That there is this impact of absolute rightness moving in upon the individual. That everything is divinely and eternally as it should be. Then he says to himself, how should it be? It's gone. Or he says to himself, this experience tells me I should no longer fear. He has begun to rationalize. The experience goes again. It is only in the immediate and unconditioned impact of the thing itself, with the complete transcendence of all interpretive, contemplative sense of the continuance of self in relation to this thing. For a moment, the individual, the self, is drowned in the experience. In that moment, the experience is real. But the so-called drowned self swims to shore, reestablishes its own identity, and the experience is gone. Thus, in the contemplative yogic product, the breaking through of the pattern of expectancy, the breaking through of the traditional form, even in which illumination itself is supposed to occur, is vital. The individual expecting to see something or experience something will experience what he expects, will then think he is illumined, and will be the victim of a vicious circle. The only answer is the absolute transcendence of the impulse to expect. He must not expect he will see anything or experience anything, because whatever he expects will happen. It is the transcendency of even the expectation of the form this thing will take, which makes possible its formlessness or its absolute impact. The impact as an experience has been described by both Eastern and Western mystics. You'll find it considerably influencing certain Sufi doctrines, and, of course, the Neoplatonists, especially Plotinus. And they express it symbolically, always. Namely, that the individual has the experience of his God, or experiences the fullness of a divine nature. That in these moments, all doubt, all uncertainty, all fear, all unreasonable perturbation on any subject, all ambition, desire, hope, even the religious urge itself, all these things are swept away. There is nothing but the immediate experience of a tremendous reality, an actuality, a beingness that transforms space from a vacuum into an absolute fullness. That the individual suddenly realizes, instead of being a person in space, that the space is the reality and he is the vacuum. Complete reversal of his relationship to existence. And in that reversal, the absolute possession of his being by this quality or condition. Now, there are several ways in which this may be interpreted therefrom. Plotinus brings out, of course, the circumstance of the individual having had this experience comes back into the world again, he has only a flash. But as he says in his writings, the one instant of this, in relation to the extent of a human life, changes that entire life. But never that individual again can be captured in the net of dreams. Never can he fall again into the illusion. Because he has experienced an instant of actuality. And in that instant, every factor of existence has been reorganized. Every value has been reversed. Every concern has been completely washed of all the concern that was in it. And the individual then has experienced something that tells him that reality is greater than himself. And that the full expression of this reality is more important than the continuance of himself. And that for this, the sacrifice of self is nothing. Whereas to the average individual, the sacrifice of self would be everything, because he has no awareness beyond it. So we don't expect that the average student is going to achieve to such a situation immediately. But all of your contemplative disciplines, especially your yogas, are moving gradually in that direction. Moving in the direction of gradually liberating the individual, not only from his objective and natural and obvious errors, but gradually eliminating from him this hyper-concept of the contemplating self that must master all mysteries, solve all things, accomplish everything. He gradually relaxes, even as a disciple beginning his course of study, so that this aggressive self that is going to tell the universe what it is doing, this aggressive self that is going to paint gods in the heavens, begins early to break down, not to be eliminated, but to be modified, to be brought gradually to the point that this self can become aware of something more important than the experience of selfhood. So that from there on, growth, as it unfolds and develops and increases, is a growth toward the relaxation of these pressures, a growth towards quietude, toward the letting go of the stress and strain that rotate around this terrific concept of self. It is because man has this self that he is offended, that his pride is hurt, that he seeks to accumulate, that he will take from another for his own advantage. This self makes him an individual against the world. His own survival becomes so important that he will sacrifice everything for it. And little by little, this terrific, pressureful ego complex takes over and forces his life into one unnatural channel after another, building illusion, building deceit, building error, building false symbolism, and reducing him gradually to the level that he has to survive by multiplying his own mistakes. But if, instead of attacking all of these different things, the disciple begins by slowly relaxing that central core, gradually realizing that truth is more important than self, that the direction of attention away from the person to the impersonal. Service is one of the simplest forms of it. We forget ourselves helping another. And in that instant of self-forgetfulness, we achieve a happiness we never otherwise can attain. We are happier, better, more useful to the degree that we are not self-centered. And this goes on under discipline to a very advanced degree, in which finally man's supreme happiness, which is absolute identification with the eternal, is a result of a complete detachment from self-centeredness. And that is the work of the yogas. And the work of the lower yogas, what I would consider one of the lower yogas, Hatha yogas, is this gradual disciplining of the individual, the relaxation of the body, the removal of the focal point of self from the physical body, from the vital body, from the various physical and psychical activities of the personality. The individual who is not thinking about himself will be happier and healthier The moment he gets his mind off of his body, his digestion will be better. The moment he gets his mind off of his ego, his nerves, his thoughts, and his emotions will be better. It is all this terrific fixation of self that prevents the function of everything. And if he relaxes this pressure, vitality will move through him and keep his body going. In the final relaxation of self, universal vitality, which is reality, will sweep through all of him and achieve its perfect work in him. But until he is able to break the tension caused by the self-complex, he will be physically sick, emotionally frustrated, mentally exhausted, and spiritually isolated. He must achieve gradually the breaking down of the delusion. And as he advances in the yogas, he learns more and more of this procedure until finally, in the prince of all the yogas, he is given that which was esoterically known in India concerning this subject. But I think that our purpose tonight has been to show the importance of the discipline by means of which self-centeredness, having been released and relaxed, the body is happier, healthier. But this is a symbol of the final achievement of consciousness toward which all human beings are striving. Well, my time is up.